before, but I'll make sure. Oh, I'm live. Hey, everybody, we're live. How you doing? And I'm proud to reintroduce my now good friend Mike Jacobs because we talk all the time. I said Jacobs, but it's Jacob. So anyway, that's kind of like Zenny Abrams. You know, a lot of people call me Abrams, but it's Abraham. And, you know, I get a lot of razzing about that. But welcome, my friends. I'm just going to do one thing I want to make absolutely certain I'm doing, although people have already apparently marked this, and I'm happy that they have. I want to make absolutely certain, and when this comes up, yeah, cool. I want to make absolutely certain this is on Facebook so somebody can see this. I put this on again, but I'll make sure everyone knows we're live right now. And in utmost transparent apologies, folks, this has been an explosive day. Pun not intended.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get that one out of the way.
Busy Friday.
Yeah, exactly. And now we're live. Everybody knows that we're live. And one more sharing of the fact that we're live. And I'll put over here hashtag Oakland on Twitter, hashtag live stream, hashtag live. There we go. All right, cool. And voila. All that, now I can get rid of all those pages because they suck up RAM. And down to where I'm at. How you doing?
Awesome. Great.
Hey.
Thank you.
Everybody knows how we roll, folks. My guests do the talking more than I do. There is one thing I want to get out. I was going to play it, but I think in the interest of time, since I'm late, out of respect for your time, I'll just ask you, what did you think of Dave Kaval's, first of all, interview with me regarding his comment, which is really shockingly dismissive, and then the day after that, before the Oakland City Council?
Well, thanks for having me on in that context too, Zenny, because I think this is really kind of where rubber hits the road on a lot of issues with the council meeting coming up on the 20th and discussions about the term sheet. And, we're from where we're sitting right now, we're fighting to get some respect from the A's for our issues, and I think that's really what you were asking, and what you were hearing from Dave Kaval the last couple of days, and on some of the radio spots that I was doing with him too, is just a dismissal of our issues and pretending we don't exist. And the longer you put your head in the sand, the more we go away. And as I've told you off the line, when that's the response, our only way to counter that, I guess, is to get louder. And so that's what we're doing. You and I have talked about this before. I talked about it a lot with other people. You can have different opinions about whether or not you think the project is good or bad, whether or not you should redevelop that area of Oakland, your thoughts about industrial policy versus accommodating housing pressures or providing a venue for sports. Those are totally legitimate debates. And that's what land use planning is, right? It's a community saying, here's the set of priorities that I want to emphasize with this type of allocation of land for certain uses. Or here are the health and safety parameters that I want to put around allowing uses to be compatible or not in areas. Those are good debates to have, because you have to, right? If you're going to grow, you're going to create friction between uses, and you need to accommodate those. So that's, reasonable minds can disagree. That's where you and I are on a lot of this stuff, and it's totally legitimate. It's fine. It can be done respectfully. But let's say I lose on that debate. Everyone, including the mayor, including the A's, including the port, and everyone who's reasonable on both sides, has said publicly and agrees that if you are going to move forward with it, you have to deal with the practical implications of such a huge transformation of that neighborhood and its location right next to what we do at the port. And so we all know what those issues are. Are you going to keep trucks moving? Are you creating new space for us to move those areas where we do work now into new locations? Do we have elbow room to grow in the future? Are the trains still moving? And can we turn ships and keep growing the size of our vessels? Those aren't surprises to anybody. So to turn around and say, on the one hand, make his arguments for why he wants to transform Oakland, totally legitimate. To turn around and then say, but I'm not going to deal with their issues if I win my way in that debate, and that our issues don't exist. I mean, frankly, that's just stupid. It's insulting, and it gets to a point where you got to ask yourself, is he serious about dealing with these issues? And that's tough. That's the place we find ourselves.
Hey, FYI, I happen to find the section of clip I can play.
Sure.
To get an idea what we're talking about here. And here it is, folks. This is the area. I believe it's at the 1868 mark, according to the transcript. I'm going to play it right now. And this is Mr. Kaval. Yeah, there we go. Here we go. At all, or his people.
Well, we don't think they're concerned.
Let me go back here. Here we go. We have successes. It's just, that's another long story. Hey, I'm getting some questions here. Most of them I probably goosed by my friend, our mutual friend, Mike Jacob. And one of them I'll take from my friend Rick Gray, who wants to know, he has another question basically about if you have a plan for the seaport there, the maritime-oriented plan, and have you had a chance to talk with Mike? Or I think you were on the radio with him, but I mean, privately at all, or his people?
Well, we don't think their concerns are warranted. We made a lot of concessions to the maritime community as part of the port agreement that was unanimously voted on over 2 years ago. It included having the turning basin possibility, giving up 10 acres of the site, having a transportation plan that really segregates the trucks from pedestrian and car activity. And that's a lot of the infrastructure that's being invested. And then having a buffer zone where we're not going to have housing on the most western part of the site, the 55 acres, to make sure there's space between the maritime and industrial interests and the commercial side. So we feel that we have a really good plan. It's 2% of the port property. It's going to have no bearing on how the port operates. No one's going to lose any jobs. And I really think it's more about fear-mongering around pollution and things of that nature, which is really sad that it's come down to that. But our project is going to clean up a lot of these areas. It's going to right some long-standing wrongs in West Oakland with environmental justice. And we are proud of our record. And even the lawsuit that we won against Mr. Steele just a couple months ago that basically says that they can't transmit hazardous waste through Oakland anymore. So regardless if this project ever goes forward or anything happens, that's something we're proud that we were a part of, because that's a good thing for society in general.
And shifting back to Las Vegas, that was pretty much flat there. So what are your responses there?
Yeah, I think what you're hearing there from Dave is really the source of a lot of our ongoing issues and concerns. He can't say that he's going to live in concert and harmony with us and we don't have any issues, and then turn around and say, but I'm going to clean them up. I'm going to run them out of town, and I'm going to make sure they don't operate anymore. You can't say both of those things with a straight face, and that's where the issue here comes in. I mean, what we're looking for are a couple different things. One, with respect to the EIR, we're looking for a really full accounting of all of those environmental impacts. So there is direct mitigation that's paid for out of this project. And two, as a business matter with the Seaport Compatibility Measures process, Dave referred to some of the concessions that they put out there. Well, we don't think they're concessions. We think that they're processes that the port said, here are things you need to do with us, i.e. the port, to address these issues of seaport compatibility. And so those processes are set up, but the processes are set up to then go back to a negotiation between the port and the A's. And the A's can always say no. So we need to create the ability to have that conversation from a business perspective. What are the measures that need to go in place so the port and the A's really, stay true to their word about seaport compatibility? And those two things need to happen in parallel. We need to have the process going forward on the EIR, and then on the flip side, we need to have the business process going forward, and then those need to be paid for. So the same kind of conversation that I think you've been having with the public and with Dave and the A's, the city council and the city staff are having now with the A's, the community is having with the A's through the community benefits agreement process. That's the same conversation we're trying to have, which is nailing down what are they going to be paying for? What does the infrastructure needs of the city look like if the project moves forward? And our issues, unfortunately, are complex, they're time consuming, and they're expensive. And so when you're looking at this site, I think what you're hearing from Dave is we don't want to deal with issues that are complex because we're trying to move this forward quickly. We don't want to deal with issues that are time consuming because we're trying to move this forward quickly. And we don't want to deal with items that are expensive because they just don't want to deal with other items that are expensive either. I don't blame them. That's the job of the developer. But it's the job of the city and the port to sit down and say, there's a bigger context here. And I think one of the places where you and I might be on different sides of the debate about what does the urban fabric down there need to look like. But on the practical side, we're on the same place, which is if you move forward with this, there's a lot of value that can be built out of it that should be spent on all these other infrastructure and mitigation measures. And so that's the thing that we're trying to get our handle around. So ironically, when I hear the A's and Dave talk about all the but-for, financing that they're going to be able to finance, they're right. They're creating a lot of value there that doesn't exist on the tax rolls. There's also a lot of but-for costs they're presenting, but they're off the rolls. Right. So things, and there was a slide about that the other day that city staff put up about the city costs and revenue. That's not a full accounting of all the project. Our costs are operational, right? And our costs are in infrastructure will never show up on the city's books. So that's the debate that has to happen, and it requires people to be mature and sit down at a table and say, what's really happening here? And so, like I said, I think when we hear from council members, they know that these are real issues. They don't think that we're fear mongering or we're just here out of spite. It's almost like Dave thinks we're just doing this for fun. Believe me, there's plenty of other things we'd rather be talking about than this, but this is where we are.
Why does he, it seems to me, all of a sudden feel emboldened to take a dismissive tone, in your opinion?
I don't think it's new. I think it's unfortunate, but we have not had a working partner in the A's for some time. So maybe it's because he is being aggressive on litigation already. He's filed 2 suits directly against Schnitzer. Maybe it's because he's still in litigation over what rules are going to apply to his EIR with respect to the review. I don't know. Maybe he's just actually being really just strategic about saying, I don't want to have to negotiate on these expensive items for as long as I can to avoid multiple bites at the apple. That would be logical as a developer trying to do that. Or just devalue the impetus for people to deal with our issues altogether. And those last 2 things, I think, are logical from his point of view. And does he have an incentive to deal with our issues if he thinks he can talk around them? No. But that's not a long-term strategy for getting to yes. And I think that's the same thing that we're seeing with the community fund, right? Where instead of engaging with the community and building up a discussion with the community where he's actually building blocks towards successful agreement, what he's basically saying is, regardless of whether or not you like how they're proposing to fund the community fund, he's basically saying, I'm just giving you money, figure it out, but also here's the amount I'm giving you, but without telling you how we got to that number. It's not because he's doing community project A and community project B and community project C, and you add those up and it gets to a number.
Mm-hmm.
Do that. He just said, here's your number. And he knows he can't do that with us. We're going to come back and we're going to say, here are infrastructure projects we want you to pay for.
Right.
And we're going to be giving him a timeline for these things. Like, on the not my direct issue at PMSA, but as one of our alliance partners is Union Pacific Railroad, they're not only asking for a full grade separation of the site, they're asking for a full grade separation of the site for the construction traffic. And that's what they're pushing back on. Can you imagine like what it does for his construction timeline if you have to actually put in the grade separations early? And that I think that's the kind of complication that they're looking at, and they're saying, wow, this isn't good. On our side, it's the same thing with the turning basin. Yeah, on paper, the turning basin is part of the non-binding term sheet with the port, but it's a non-binding term sheet item. They haven't agreed to anything. Yeah. So we're concerned that essentially what that says is if the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't move quickly, which it's not known for, all of a sudden they have some sort of springing entitlement to what acreage that we need to turn ships. That's scary. So anyways.
Hey, curious. I want to clarify something while it's on my mind before I forget. My position on this, as in most things in life, is really governed by a series of if-then-else statements. And in this instance, I would be more in favor of the A's at the Coliseum if we had a sea level rise plan. And we don't. And regardless of what Dave said and everything else, and Dave has been on record as not being interested in the Coliseum. He wasn't interested in last year. They're not doing their baseball village, right? But and this is where it gets to my next question for you. My tearful disappointment, as you know, with the city of Oakland, how it's handled this project. I feel like it wouldn't be a discussion of you versus Dave Kaval or vice versa if there were a point person and a task force of Oakland business leaders that was able to really take up this issue and provide a negotiating factor for the mayor, because the mayor doesn't know this, and we're dealing with staff members. I believe the project manager was hired in 2019. Ms. Lake, this is not redevelopment is not her thing in tax recovery financing, and the city administrator Ed Reskin, who I've known for a long time, has always been a transit guy, not a redevelopment guy. So you add it all up, and it does spell I'll put it in a nicer tone, a weakness of intellectual to appropriately deal with this problem. And so I'm saying that I'm not against one or the other. I'm not an activist type like that.
Yeah.
But I'm concerned about the extreme lack of professionalism or lack of 60 style managerial science. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. And I'm not saying that jocularly. You know what I'm talking about. That's what a lot of management, consulting and management and public management tools and techniques were developed that led to the Kennedy School of Government and the LBJ School of Government and this way of thinking, not to belabor this point, which might have violated my own rule, but that led to the introduction of microeconomics and how you use it to evaluate projects. But I digress. My point is, I don't feel like any of that is here, and it's got me in a tizzy, Mike. So talk me down from the ledge.
Yeah. I love the public policy angle on this. I mean, if you're going to break that down, I mean, where's the cost benefit analysis? That's one of the things we've been asking for. You heard a little bit about that. You know, what are the economic impacts of this versus something else? I mean, that's just basic. Let me give you my my spiel, and then I'll answer your question. But our spiel obviously is the same thing we've been saying for a long time, which is the city of Oakland is blessed with the ability to have a working industrial and amazing sports complex, and it's invested in the infrastructure to do that at the Coliseum, and it should do both, and that's a win-win. It shouldn't introduce this conflict; it doesn't have to. But if it does, to your point, and I should say this with I think the caveat that I think the city staff that they put together on this project, especially Ms. Mabron, from when we've worked with them, with respect to the project team, they're really solid. They have a lot of experience delivering projects in the private sector. They know what they're doing. The last set of communications that we saw that you highlighted on one of your blogs back in March, basically telling the A's, here's your roadmap to getting this done, that for whatever reason they threw back in the face of the staff, and I don't understand that. But I mean, they were very direct about how to do that. But it doesn't get to your point, which is the broader public policy question, which is, if you're going to, try to do something this big, and it's complex, you have a lot of different parties at the table, why aren't you creating the forum for actually having real discussions about reinvestment in this area, and who does it benefit and why? The place for that really would have been if the city had kept Howard Terminal like it originally was in the downtown specific plan, and force people to have that conversation about what this area of the city is really for and what it represents, right? And it would create the place where we have that initial debate, where industry would walk in and we'd say, this is an important area for us to be able to grow and to stage what we do and to create an industrial buffer zone. And other folks, and the folks that are trying to create additional space for housing and for other recreational activities like the ballpark, could say, no, this is where we have to grow downtown. And if we're going to address those two issues, do it in a general planning context. Have that conversation about what you want the city to look like, and then do the estimates of, okay, like, what's the transit infrastructure going to look like in this space? It's a transit desert. I mean, everyone knows that. The only thing that's going to happen here that's being proposed for this project is a glorified bus stop on 2nd Street. There's not a single transit stop on the property. 58, 3,000 people, 35,000 people into a game, 1.5 million square feet of office space. It's like taking 6 blocks of the financial district plus, the Giants Stadium, and not having anything, no bus stop. That's crazy. In the middle of one of the most transit-rich cities in America. I mean, Oakland is an amazing transit city. Between the amount of BART line that we have, now BRT in addition to AC Transit, all that stuff that we've invested in moving people. So in any event, maybe I'm digressing into...
No, not at all. And it made me think of what I was doing at 6 years old, which was basically designing cities in the dirt. But then also what attracted me to want to work for the Walt Disney Company on Epcot, when it was really Epcot and not a theme park, and I was like 12 years old. And that is this animation of Epcot that had the monorail zipping out, told you where the land uses were.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have anything like that for this project. And that's both the city and the A's fault and Major League Baseball, because this is a city within a city.
Yeah.
and yet we're arguing about it like it's some giant house, you know? And that's what makes me cry, Mike. It's like intellectually we went down. And I know you talk about city staff and everything. You have to work with them, and I understand that, and so do I in a sense. But I'm providing the shock truth, because the simple fact of the matter is, you mentioned they have private sector experience. But this is a public sector thing. This is about building cities. You know, this is about city building. This is about understanding where transit stops should be. This is about understanding where flows go and saying, hey, look, do we want that? Right?
That's right.
And the only way we can achieve that is if we all work together. But if we start off the way that we're starting off with these activist approaches like yes and no and your side and the other, we don't get anywhere.
Yeah.
And it also takes the fun out of the thing. This should be fun.
Well, I think what you just hit on is, so when Dave says about his project, I'm going to bring 2.5 million to 3 million people to this location every year. And then on the flip side, when he's asked about what he's going to do to facilitate that, he says, those are off-site improvements, and I don't need to worry about those. That's insane.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, whether or not I have an interest in the fact that the off-sites are really important, because we don't want 2.5 million people gumming up the works of what we do, because our business is moving crap. The fact that that's where they're at is just crazy to me. It isn't just us in the freight industry that have an interest in making things move. Everyone who lives in Jack London Square, and I did for a long time, and my office is still there. We know what it's like to try to wait to get on the damn Jackson on-ramp every morning and every afternoon. It's crazy. Like, just watching all the people trying to get in the tube to go to Alameda, coming off of 880, is ridiculous. And frankly, right before the pandemic, when things started heating up, Waze was sending everybody down 8th Street to avoid 880, and they were just swamping downtown. And all of that is happening before you get to the thing that scares a lot of the truckers, which is the way that the city is approaching the transportation demand management for the new ballpark is not by creating more on-site parking, because that induces auto traffic, right? It's to discourage auto traffic. And the way they do that is by creating congestion. It's road diet. Whether you like road diet or not, as a theory, that is what's happening here to reduce the total transportation demand management side of the project. And that induces congestion by design. That's how it works. It discourages auto traffic. It's effective at discouraging auto traffic because it's effective at creating congestion. When you're a trucker and you hear that there's a project right next to you that's going to bring 3 million people a year with guaranteed congestion and no major transportation planning, that's a problem. So I think that's a lot of the disconnect here, is that going into this, that the outcome of it is not improved mobility. That's a problem. That is a real problem. And then I think the secondary issue that you were talking about, and that I'm talking about too, is that if you know that that's your problem going into this project, why do you have no partnership with AC Transit going into it? I mean, why aren't you staking out the AC Transit office every single day for the last 3 years saying, I need to talk to all of the directors here. So I need to know exactly how many more buses do you need? How many more drivers do you need? What is it going to cost? Where do I stage these things? And how do I make sure they're not clogging up what's already a busy downtown and Broadway? That's what you need to do. But instead they get an EIR letter from AC Transit that says you haven't done any of the homework. That's not a letter from project opponents. That's a public agency that's responsible for transit that says this hasn't been thought through. You got the same thing from BART. You got the same thing from Cap Corridor. Those are the fixed rail assets you need to move people. If if the public agency that runs buses and the public agencies that run trains don't think you've accommodated them, you don't have a good transit project.
Question. Isn't that also the job of city staff to know that as well? That's what I go back to, because look, I can tell you myself, hey, if you talk to BCDC, you talk to, all these stakeholders that have been there for decades now, and yet it seems to me that you have the city staff on the one hand who doesn't really know, and they're not aware that they don't know. And I think all of this has been caused by strong mayor structure. And that's, I don't care who's in the seat, whether it's Libby or started with Jerry or anybody else, a strong mayor structure. So what happens is that the chief administrative officer's tenure is much less, sometimes only a percentage of the boss that hired him. And so what happens is we get this institutional brain drain, and we don't have anybody that's there, and we have a hemorrhaging of late to say, hey, wait a minute, excuse me, this is what we should do. And they wind up being, people outside of it with their own media companies yelling at them. So,
right. Right. I agree with that with respect to the structure. I think it's manifested itself. We also suffer, and I know you know this personally, from just turnover in all of our public institutions. We had so much built up just institutional knowledge and the folks that were running projects throughout the Bay Area. And those people have retired, or they've moved on, or they've moved to greener pastures. But we haven't replaced them. We don't have the same tools we used to have. We don't have the redevelopment agencies in place that foster this type of thing. I think you know this. I was on the Alameda County Planning Commission for 12 years. We had amazing people on staff at the county that had gone through all kinds of projects. I mean, the county basically turned over and built the city of Dublin in the late 80s. And really, of the troika of folks that ran that, only one of them is left. And he's an amazing agency developer at the county now. But the amount of institutional knowledge that left compared to who's still in the department is just sad. Mm-hmm. And so you just can't do as much as you used to be able to do. You don't have the same capacity. As talented as the people are that are left, they don't have the same toolbox. And that's certainly true at the city, which has turned over a lot faster and lost a lot of those voices. So yeah, I mean, I think that's tough everywhere. It's true at BART. They still have a couple of the folks from their old station area planning team, but most of them are retired. The original people that I worked with when I worked at BART 18 years ago, I wrote a tax increment financing for a transit-oriented development bill when I was in the government relations department.
Wait, that was you?
Yeah, trying to get the state to, trying to get the state to allow for TIF.
Yeah.
Without having to determine blight, right? Because remember, at the time, you had to do a blight determination to do redevelopment agency work, and we're like, that's crazy.
I got to ask you for your opinion about this, adjunctly related. I think it's nonsensical for otherwise good Senator Scott Wiener to push transit zoning without TIF. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that makes that. Well, I guess it's like, why do it?
Yeah, he ignores me, and I'm like, okay, you keep on going, and then you have and I like Sonia Truss, personally, she's great, but come on, folks, put a TIF in there, make it, make it work financially.
It's essentially saying that cities and counties don't know about transit-oriented development and just haven't done it. It's like, they do. Been working on it for years. I think that's all an aside to saying, I think you're right about a lot of these structural issues, and it's manifesting itself here. It's not because people aren't good people. It's not because they don't want to deal with issues, but you're missing some deal makers at the table to say, there's a place to getting to yes.
Yes.
and I can acknowledge that and say you're exactly 100% right. And I have a vested interest in saying no to the project. But if the city is going to decide I want to get to yes, you better damn well do it right. Maximize the value out of the project and then pay for the impacts. I can't even get people to acknowledge, the project sponsor, that they're going to have impacts. So I'm still on the side of, I'm not even at a place where we're getting to yes. But you're exactly 100% right. Once you're there, why wouldn't you maximize value out of the project? Why wouldn't you take advantage of the fact that you can actually address these infrastructure problems? And I don't know if there's something there. I mean, maybe it's inherent in the project. Maybe it's just because of the project sponsor, because you did hear the other day where they don't even want to pay the affordable housing fees, which just boggles my mind. I mean, you can't float $75 million out of $12 billion over 40 years when you're not even going to be the housing developer, because you're going to spin off those lots like the first opportunity you get. I mean, that's crazy. That's insane. If you can't do that, something's wrong.
That's also a mistake of staff to allow a conversation that Dave and I had way back in 2017 to advance this much unfettered. Let me explain. I'm the person, as you may remember, I don't think we talked about it here, but I actually introduced the whole matter of using tax increment financing for the project. Dave at the time said you can't use public money, and I said, no, you should take a look at SB 628 deal, right? And I sent that to him, and I said, look, you can pull $85 million out for affordable housing. That was my intent, was to make sure that we had a conversation where the A's could provide affordable housing. But I think where it's become kind of disconnected is, as a guy who has affordable housing performers in his computer, all right, I always think in terms of the gap finance. In other words, the A's have to spend X amount on the housing or the developer they work with, right? Because they're not housing developers to begin with. Let's get that out of the way. So that means that Dave doesn't understand the pro forma himself, okay? And I know Dave doesn't. All right, so let's get that out of the way. The question should be, hey, look, do you have a problem with spending X for this gap to make this affordable? And if his answer is that he does, then we have a real problem, okay? But what he is hearing is, I have to pay for the whole thing. And when you go, this as well as I do, when it boils down to that, that's not really what it is. What it is producing a subsidy to make a facility affordable. Right. See, that's what I'm talking. That's another reason I just lose my hair. I don't have any. Okay. Because
it's aside from the fact, Zenny, that if you just break all this down, I mean, it just sounds like you're just a huge tax increment financing nerd.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done thousands of these things. That really is it. Also, Melrose. I've done a lot of these estimates. That's why I can tell you, you say you're going to use Melrose in place of tax increment finance. I think you're nuts, because the revenue stream isn't, as robust. But absolutely, I went to school to learn how to shape government to help those who don't have as much. Today, the activists, they just want to take things over and basically steal stuff. But what I'm trying to explain to people is that's not the way to go.
Right.
We have enough tools in our economic and legal toolbox and our policy toolbox to really get what we want. But something has happened that led us down this path, and it's something that took me by surprise.
Yeah. Well, the secondary issue, I think, for all this stuff is people lose track of the fundamental good that came from redevelopment in a lot of ways. Is that it is helping facilitate projects that otherwise can't pencil, not because of the private aspect of the deal, but because of all the other public infrastructure that is potentially necessary to make a deal work. But it's not intended to create new private value per se. It's supposed to be the other way around, right? And that's what fostered a partnership. That's why it was entirely reasonable in the original formation of redevelopment agencies to require the set aside for housing. And it's what set up, unfortunately, all the reasons why redevelopment agencies came to be villains in a lot of narratives. They weren't spending their housing money, they'd sit on it, right? So when you told the public, why am I taking this tax increment aside? One of the answers always was because we're providing affordable housing. But then the cities and the counties and the redevelopment agencies didn't do it.
Right.
And the second part was the formulation, as silly as it was always restricted to blight. And that got twisted and turned all over the place. It got twisted to hurt communities because it was labeling them as blighted, and then it was doing totally unreasonable things like just bulldozing entire blocks and then doing a urban redevelopment that people didn't want on one side. But then on the other side, the most famous example was when the city of Fairfield declared an entire empty field blight so they could redevelopment agency for the new Anheuser-Busch factory out there off of 80, right?
Well, if I may, I remember when Santa Ana declared the entire city a redevelopment project area.
Well, that might have been justified at the time.
Yeah,
justified at the time. but you're right. I mean, but so what we have now, when you're looking at the enhanced IFD framework, SB 293. I mean, crap. I wrote SB 63. Senator Hall introduced it. It's for seaport IFDs because when you do it right and it's targeted. And you control it, then it's hard to abuse.
Yeah.
You have so much oversight over it. And this goes back to the same principle that I think Dave was missing with us and with the community. He's missing it with this too, which is these are building blocks. Don't just give us a number and say, I can generate this much tax increment, so that's how much money I get. That's not how this is supposed to work.
Right.
You're supposed to say, here are the infrastructure components I want to put together, and it adds up to this. It's project X, Y, and Z, and so the total is this. That's what I want to finance. That's tangible. That's telling people you're real, and it's defensible, and that isn't happening here. And that's one of the things we're fighting for on our side of the equation. How do I elbow my way in to this total? And because I'm just getting a number up front, I don't know what's in there. No one's told me what's in there. They can't tell me whether I'm in or I'm out. And then, by the way, if I'm out, how'd they decide? They didn't build this up from the up, right?
Right. If I may, sorry about that. The problem is I don't think they know either. But I was going to say one thing before I get to that. In that, with respect to redevelopment. In the Oakland context, we've never had any of those problems with respect to bad spending allegations or anything. When redevelopment was killed, 2011, we had 111 million. We had 109 million the year before that. We had 89 million the year before that. That's for affordable housing alone. If we had maintained redevelopment in Oakland, if we had fought, said, hey, look, we're going to do it anyway, you have to jail us, we would have had $1 billion, and I argue we would not have the homeless problem we have today at all. And so,
yeah, you take 20% of that off the top for affordable housing. That would be amazing.
Right. No, we had the model of how things should be done, and what people forget about Jerry's 10K project at the time, and even Jerry forgets this, is going around like I didn't want redevelopment spent in my downtown and all this jazz, but his downtown was actually fueling the affordable housing budget that we had. That all that market rate development was causing it to be goosed. It was nice. And now what we have how in the books though that we don't use, signed into law in 2015. It was introduced as AB 2280, and yet it was changed to AB 2, and that's community revitalization and investment authorities. And it's a much simpler, more elegant way that really is like the old redevelopment system, where you could have different project areas, including West Oakland, Maritime, Howard Terminal, East Oakland, Chinatown, right?
Right.
And I'm advocating that we go that route because Oakland hits all the marks in terms of qualifications, and yet we don't have that ugly legal block in terms of community spending. Because Mike, what they're looking at is saying, "Hey, look, we're going to push these, enhanced infrastructure development financing districts, excuse me, but we can't pay for what the community wants."
Yeah, I'm advocating for them. I'm advocating for them to continue to not listen to you and do it wrong.
But see, here's the thing: if they listen to me, you get what you want.
It is a weird place, right?
Yeah.
I do not want the project going through, but if it goes through, I want them to be able to raise as much money to pay for all the infrastructure they need to do that they're ignoring now as possible. So yeah, I mean, I think that is a conundrum for people. One of the things that you've criticized our campaign for, and I don't think you're wrong in your criticism on the back end, is where we're saying, they're going to be using public money for the project. And as an alliance of folks, I mean, we think that people need to know, like, this is a big chunk of public money.
Yes.
And in the context of the arguments that we're using as the East Oakland Stadium Alliance, the issue there isn't just that there's public tax money, although there are plenty of people that are in my coalition that just think that that's bad. I'm not one of those people, but I'm not going to criticize them for their point of view. But the bigger issue that we all agree with on our side of this equation is that you'll need less public money to go into infrastructure if you're at the Coliseum. You need less environmental cleanup at the Coliseum. You need less transit money if you're at the Coliseum. So the balance of equals on all these other things, you can create value at the you've got a lot of acreage. You've got issues there, no doubt, but they're not all that different from the issues at Howard.
I would challenge that. Right. I would challenge that, and I'll say, to maintain my rule about you talking more than I do, I'll be very succinct. All right. Because of the sea level rise problem, which starts at the Oakland airport, through the airport business park up to the Coliseum, and it's so bad that one group was talking about undergrounding. Yeah, it's 2 mile stretch of I-880 that goes past the Coliseum. So my point is that problem alone makes the price tag down there bigger than Howard Turner, which is a smaller swath of property. Okay. And that's what I'm saying. Look, how would I solve it? I'll tell you real quick. You're looking at the guy that created the Coliseum Redevelopment Survey Area data from scratch. I built the model for it called the Area Redevelopment Economic Model. Ezra Poor asked for and all kinds of calculations. Given where I believe the tax assessed value should have for that area should be right now, which might not be about 15 billion, somewhere in there, we can float a 45-year bond at a debt coverage ratio of 2, and we could fix that, plus get a revitalized Coliseum, plus a revitalized East Oakland like that. And we can do it with a legislation that's on the books right. We can do this right fucking now. And yeah, I cursed. We have the tools, Mike.
Yeah. The only thing that I guess I would add to that is that when we look at those two issues, the two sites with the same issue with sea level rise, it does really seem that the Coliseum would be easier to fortify just because of where it sits. And it's not surrounded on 3 sides by water. It doesn't create an island effect. It does have 880 on one side. And you just cannot surrender that much land to sea level rise. So over time, you have to address it. Otherwise, you've got a really big problem. And so the nice thing about that is, with San Leandro Creek there, it's already a channelized environment. That's a wall. 880 it's already there. Obviously, that needs to be addressed with respect to the sea level rise in the area, but that's a wall. You already have the overpass on the northwest corner. So you're going to have to do it with one development. Whoever the master developer is for that project, they have to deal with that problem. The city is not going to surrender that value of 150 acres in East Oakland, and the community should demand that it gets addressed, right? Because you need to redevelop that spot. Mm-hmm. Whether there's a sports team or not, if you just let it sit there, what a waste of amazing space and locations. The one thing that we get, I think caught up on a little bit is who said what about this and that, because there's so much tit and tat over Howard Terminal, and but the big picture is that whether or not there's a baseball team or Major League Baseball says the site is viable, it's a community. Who cares whether or not the Major League Baseball commissioner said the site was viable? You need to invest in it, and you need to make East Oakland whole, and they deserve it. So, if that happens to involve a baseball team, then fantastic. If it doesn't, then you don't get to sit back and say, well, Rob Manfred said don't invest in East Oakland, so I guess we're not going to. That's just silly. Yeah. So it's actually, I think good that there's still so much focus on that site. They're going forward with those other bids on that site. We're also really happy that in our conversations with AASEG and with the Dave Stewart Group, both of them have said that if the A's need a plan B, that they're willing to work with them on stadium development for the baseball team. Mm-hmm. Because the A's sit there as the co-owner of the site, as it were, I don't think they have much of a choice but to say that. So I think that's a good. Oh man, could you imagine bidding for a site and saying, well, I know this other guy owns half of it, but screw him?
There's been a lot of that going on.
No, not gonna happen.
That's hilarious. Hey, I want to get your take also on that subject though. What I find bothersome is I look back over the history of Oakland and going back to 86, actually 85, 86, when I wrote a paper called Jumping on the Bandwagon While the High-Tech Bandwagon While the E-Ticket, which is Oakland's attempt to get into high-tech industry. I met a guy named Brian McCrowder, who then worked for the Oakland Economic Development Corporation and later became a multi-millionaire in the toy industry, but that's another story. He told me the whole story about how Paul Cobb, who is now Oakland Post publisher, and I call Paul, and was then later the executive director of the Oakland Citizens Committee for Urban Renewal. At that point, he got together 43 community groups to oppose the first crack at developing a 2 million square foot downtown shopping center, what we now call Uptown. And when you go back through the history of large development projects, it doesn't matter if it's that or Old Oakland or City Center itself, race always comes into play. And what happens is always someone saying, hey, wait a minute, you're not spending X in the Black community, therefore we don't want you to spend Y for white folks. And Mike, what's bothered me is that saw consistently occurs in Oakland's history, and it all the way up until now. And we've done nothing to say, hey, wait a minute, how do we stop this, this racially choking off investment is what it is in a part of the Bay Area that historically has been hampered by institutional investor racism, so much so that when I wrote a study for the San Francisco Human Rights Commission and the late Ed Lee, called The African Americans in San Francisco from 1960 to 1990, of all of the movements from county to county in the Bay Area, where let's say you move from San Francisco County to San Mateo, and it's always adjacent, right? But it wasn't in the case of San Francisco and Alameda. They leapfrogged it to go to Contra Costa. It was the wildest statistical data result I've ever seen in my entire life with respect to movement. And so here we are. Why was that? Because Oakland's Black, right? And so we haven't overcome that ability. We haven't overcome that dynamic. And I I mean, I feel like I know how we can get there, but I don't know that we'll ever get there.
Yeah.
It may wind up in Oakland not having sports organizations and not having a lot of things that we could normally have. That's what I don't know. Talk me down off the ledge.
Well, I can't talk you out of any of that fact and history, because obviously that's stuff that that you can testify to. So I'm glad you did. But on our side of the equation, we have fortunately not had that issue with respect to institutional investment, because the industrial sector doesn't have the luxury of choosing where it puts its capital. So, in our industry, by the way, I love it when the A's were pointing to the folks that are underwriting international shipping as being billionaires. When the owner of the A's got his money handed down from his dad, who made his billions in retail, which relied on international shipping to move his product.
Yep.
But in any event, you only can put in the infrastructure you need for industrial development on the seaport, where you have a willing public authority and you have deep water on one side, and upland you have the acreage there to handle the cargo you take off, and then the trucking and the rail industries to move it. If you don't have a node with all those things and a willing public agency willing to lease you the property and underwrite that with a public revenue bond, you don't have a facility. So to your point, and I think it's a valid one, which is, are there subtexts for why the people that are running a baseball team might run to the MLB and say, East Oakland's not viable. And then when you push them on it, and they say, well, it's not downtown. But then he's happy to go to Nevada and say, I could go to Summerlin. I'd be happy on the Strip. How about Henderson? Are you kidding me? I mean, we're talking about 3 more stops on a BART's line from downtown. And even the gondola thing. I mean, what you're literally saying is, I don't think my fans will be okay walking from 12th Street down Broadway to my stadium. I got to fly them over those people. That's crazy. That's insane. But yeah, fortunately, I mean, we haven't had to deal with that issue. And then the other thing, I think the joke that we like to make internally in the industry when we hear about people not being happy with what we're doing with respect to investments and where we're sitting, is, well, where do you want us to bring in your cargo? If you don't want to port, but you're still going to go to the store, where's your stuff come from? So, in the long term, those are big regional questions that I think people need to deal with too. And so those are institutional investor issues that I think we don't have the same issue that you're talking about, just because, we're just limited in choice. Every single one of the RFPs that we ever have for a large container facility is just so highly contested. And then you're putting in capital for 40, 45, we have a concession right now in Southern California for over 50 years. You're talking about massive investments of billions of dollars in capital. You were there. And then you're a partner with the public. So it's just a good juxtaposition to, I think, what you were bringing up, which was, how do you make your capital stays?
Yeah, and I don't want to be misinterpreted as blaming you guys or anybody else. The resolution of this problem is government, okay? And this gets back to staff. If staff understands the history and understands the tools to use to avoid repeating the past, then we get we get to yes, we get to a situation where you get the investment you want, others get the high return they want, and we can all move forward. I, for one, am obsessed with the idea of the two coexisting, okay? But I'm also obsessed with the idea of redeveloping the Coliseum for the NFL. Yeah. Something Dave doesn't think should be done. I completely disagree. But my point is, Mike, all of this, if we had a strong, active government that understood professionally what it was doing, you would not be in this position. That's all I'm saying. It's not a matter of me disliking your position. I actually understand it. But I just go back, I go back to the tool part. It's like the right tool for the right job, but I don't think we have people who understand what those tools are. That's all I'm saying.
Hey, I think you're in the right spot, and I, there's only so much you can do at the public spot place, and you know this from your time in the city. The city is pushing on a rubber band, right? Zoning tools, planning, even incentives are only things where you can offer people, right? You put them out to the public and you say, here's our menu. What can you do with it? And so, yeah, you need to be creative. You need to have the expertise to say, like, I want to try to make this as workable for people as possible. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I could not disagree with in any way, shape, or form with the A's and with Dave is when they say their project has the pencil. Of course it does, right? I mean, we don't think that they don't have a plan B, and we think they could do it in East Oakland. But if they say they can't, then they can't. And then that gets back to your point, which is one of the things that I think is pretty fascinating about all this is then it is up to the city to sit down with everyone and say, if this is going to happen, how do you make it work? And when you're seeing, the developer, I don't care who it is, whether it's the A's or not, walking into a city council meeting and saying, I need you to give me an answer, yes or no. And on the other side, the city council is saying, you haven't talked to me in months and I have no idea what's happening and you're negotiating with my staff in public. That's a disconnect.
Yeah.
Not optimizing anything. They're not sitting down with the same tools in the toolbox, right? I mean, that's disconcerting. And if anyone's an Oakland A's fan and they're hearing that, if you're an Oakland resident and you're concerned about that, if you're in the maritime industry, you're concerned about that, if you're a housing advocate, you're concerned about that. Everyone, you heard the folks from Chinatown. Everyone has so much anxiety over this, and no one's communicating.
Yep.
So I think that anxiety is well founded, and back to at the beginning of this interview, when you asked me, what are we doing and why is the temperature so high on this stuff? That's because people aren't listening, and I hate to use this analogy, but when you're a kid and you need to get your parents' attention, and you say, Mom, at this temperature or volume, and she doesn't respond, your need to get your mom's attention doesn't go away.
Oh.
So you raise the volume until she finally turns around and says, what?
Yep.
We've been doing this for like 3 years. Getting louder and louder. We have gotten the attention where they came around and they patted our head and they said, we'll take care of you, don't worry. But we didn't get to tell them what our issues were, and they certainly haven't been solved, right? And I think you're seeing that with all these things. With the housing conversation is just silly. I can't even, there's no other word for it. I can't believe they even had that.
No, it's why it's silly, because again, we don't have a gigantic model from which to evaluate different approaches, and people can see it. And we're at a stage in society where that could be built. I I provide a spreadsheet. That's a smidgen of the Oakland baseball symbol that I built for your students.
In the context of your spreadsheet, honestly, what's $75 million?
Yeah, right. Nothing. Right. Absolutely. And
if you ask a developer right now in Oakland, did you not expect to pay an in lieu fee if you walked down the street to the A's and said, I would love to buy this block from you and build your project? Everyone's built that into their pro forma already.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. So where's the difference? I mean, are the A's really saying my project isn't viable if I can't get this additional percentage of value, because it isn't the full 75 million, it's some percentage of that in my negotiation with the developer who's going to purchase the rights to this property from me?
Here's what I think the problem is, Mike, and just running the numbers myself. They're looking at infrastructure costs of 612 million. And here's where I get after the city. If you say the ballpark is going to be $1 billion and not $2 billion, then you don't get enough money. If you're going to use a bond issue, a debt coverage ratio of 2, your resultant monies are going to be around a little over 400 million. That's not enough. That's the problem. And so, however, if you say, hey, look, let's goose it up to $2 billion, and Dave Kaval said, hey, look, I want a developer partner, which tells me they're looking for somebody else that has some pockets. All right. When I hear that, I hear, hey, I need monetary help.
Yeah. Well, that's your point. If the developer says that's not enough, and you're looking. My internet. Oh, there, I'm back. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. It happens.
And I just to wrap up on that, I just think that means they're not capitalists.
Repeat that statement again because it got silent out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the answer is if you come back and you say I'm not getting enough on the front end on the public buy-in, that means you're undercapitalized. No one wants to spend more than they have to on a project.
Right. Absolutely. They're undercapitalized.
But you're undercapitalized.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem. And not only that, because he said, look, he said to me, we have tried to find development partners, and apparently that's ongoing. And if that's the case, then the city should be helping them in that case and find out where the gap is and how to fill it. Or maybe just admit it's not viable. Because my point is, the only way they're going to get to be able to pay $612 million in infrastructure payments is if the assessed value is at $2 billion to start. That's that means it's the baseball stadium plus or minus cost overruns something else, right?
Oh.
And that's how the city should be thinking. Instead, the city is thinking in terms of shapes of districts rather than assessed value targets, and that's why I object to the whole thing. They're not even thinking about it the right way.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the blocks.
This is your time.
To the building blocks too. No, you're right. And it goes back to the building blocks principle too, right? Tell me what the infrastructure you're going to build is first, and then you get to a target number. You've been doing numbers and more than anyone else is, and including me. But I mean, should you have an expectation that you get 100% of the tax increment from your project leading into a development? No. And so if you're just out the block, just saying, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
And then claiming, that was actually one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting at the council meeting the other day when Carol Fife, Councilmember Fife, came back and said, you want me to give you credit for the tax you already paid on community benefits? I mean, I think that's the fundamental problem here is that they're just asking for a number, but they're not with the work to say, here are the infrastructure components I'm looking to fund. And then you could get to a place where, okay, If that's what you want to do, then like let's look at other ways that we can supplement and augment the budget.
Mm-hmm.
It's a project budget. It's a pro forma. So so figure it out. And then you lose this on-site, off-site thing, where you know the off-site improvements that people are looking for. I mean, honestly, is that city deferred maintenance? Absolutely not. There has to be a nexus to your project. You have to fit within the confines of either the IFD or SB 293, whichever pathway they're going down. You know, there's going to be a segmentation in there for impacts through the EIR, and then there are other places where you build in value. That's either the community benefits process, or it's through the development agreement, or it's through our Seaport compatibility measures if we're allowed to get in. So, you know, there are ways, and again, as a project opponent, I hope they don't take your advice. I hope they flail on the side of the the street and start calling for help, you know.
They might do that, because I remember in 1993, I figured out how the city could afford a $294 million subsidy for the shopping center, and Dick Spees was like 5.5 feet in front of me and said, I just don't see, you know, where we're going to get the return from spending all this money. And that was 1994. So I mean, it was 1993 at the Lakeside Park Garden Center, you know, when we had the city hall meetings after the earthquake, right? And so it wouldn't be the first time. I just believe that, and I'll die knowing this, unfortunately, not that I'm close to death, I hope not, but that Oakland, that written in Oakland's history will be, it had the way to do it, but it didn't want to do it that way. And
I'm going to toss out one thing at you, which is a counter to that, which is there is one place where we invest a lot of money in Oakland really, really well. And it's at the port.
Yes, absolutely.
And, you know, maybe part of that is because we don't go through City Hall. Maybe part of it is because we're a proprietary agency at the Port of Oakland and they have to eat what they kill. But we finance, right now, they're sitting on close to $1 billion of revenue bond debt. And it is backed by multi-decade leases into infrastructure. And that infrastructure is not only moving record amounts of cargo this year, but it facilitates a lot of non-revenue producing infrastructure as well. So all the environmental cleanup work that has to be done. When you're in an environment where a public agency has no public tax revenues, how do you finance non-revenue producing infrastructure? By being efficient and being profitable. And we do that really well. And you know, I mean, that's the type of public-private partnership that you need to be facilitating now, especially with things like transportation. We have the benefit of being able to essentially monetize that public area through leases. And that's hard to replicate with a lot of public infrastructure. But one of the places you can do it, ironically, is with anchor tenants like large sports teams. So be creative about it and use us as a model, right?
Yeah.
Use the success of the port as a model. And hopefully, you know, again, whether Howard Terminal changes or not, that area needs to be optimized. Our argument, obviously, is optimizing it for industrial growth. Other people in the city might have different opinions about it, but if you do, I mean, you can't just let the area sit and do nothing. And that's what looks like the potential fate for East Oakland if you don't get your act together out there, right at the Coliseum.
In defense of your clients, I think this is an argument, a debate, and a war that needs to happen, because San Francisco had that port, you know, a century ago, and the talk was always, well, gee, how long could Oakland hold on to its supremacy before at some point the Bay Area's growth encroaches upon it in terms of the development? and we're seeing that, right? And so we need to work that out now before it's too late. Before we turn around, so what do we do, right? So I think you all are right to push. I really do. I want to say that. I want to be on the record as saying that. I'm not against what you're talking about at all.
No, you're not.
It's more than a conversation we need to have. It's a planning construct.
It's a real debate. It happens more than people might expect. Actually, on that note, this is the fourth stadium proposal that we've been involved in the U.S. West Coast in the last 15 years, and we've pushed back on 3 of them, and none of them have been built. In San Diego, after the Padres and the city down there built Petco Park, the Chargers tried to build a new football arena on the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal in San Diego. There was a ballot initiative on that. We fought back, we won, and we know where the Chargers are. They're not on the waterfront in San Diego.
Yeah. What happened to the combination convention center football they wanted to build? I was excited about that. Wasn't on the waterfront, was it? I thought that was off of it. Well,
they might have had another one too, but there was a ballot initiative to build it on the water at the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal. We bought that. There was another, and people look at Petco Park and they're like, look at that waterfront downtown spot. It's close to the water. It ain't on the water.
No.
It's not a working marine terminal. For the most part, except for some negative interactions with the NSF and the freight rail line right there, it does not have a lot of direct interactions with that port facility. So that's good. In Seattle, where again, people point to Seattle and they're like, look at CenturyLink and look at the Mariners Stadium. Look how close they are to the waterfront. They are close. They're close to downtown, not on the waterfront.
Right.
They're on the other side of a freeway and the BNSF yard and a marine terminal. And so there actually was a proposal to build a new basketball arena to try to lure the Sonics back to Seattle.
I remember what happened to that one. Yeah.
Well, ultimately, the city
they were going to redevelop Key Arena.
Yeah. They redid the Key Arena. They're going to have a hockey team moving in there to the Key Arena that's been redone, and the investment group that was pushing the new arena down by the old Kingdom location where the football and the new baseball stadiums are, got shut down. It got shot down by the city council after the LWU and us and the Port of Seattle and BNSF all sued them and told them, hell no, we won't go. So that is not there. They do not have waterfront ballparks. And then we didn't have anything to do with this as a prime mover, but we were part of the Keep the Warriors in Oakland, ironically, movement. The primary reason was because we did not believe that the Warriors should be at Piers 30 and 32.
Right.
So they found a great spot. It's across the street from the water, but it is not on Tidelands Trust property. It's not on port property, and it's not on the water. So I think the takeaway is you can do a lot of good stuff, including sports stadiums, very close to the water in downtown and semi-downtown locations. Victory Court would have been a great example of that. Even Laney would have been very similar, but they're different, and that's one of the issues here. And so that pressure is going to keep on and keeping on. It's always going to be there. There's always going to be an element of folks that want to redevelop the waterfront. And there's always going to be protections for the waterfront. And that's just not going to change. That tension's always going to be there. That's what city planning's for. That's what regional planning's for. That's why you force the debate. And so we're obviously forcing the debate. Like it just needs to happen. And that's a good thing. regions need to prioritize what they want to spend their time and energy and capital on. And then that you get to that secondary question, right? Which is, okay, if you decide to do it, then how do you maximize value and minimize conflicts? And we're trying to have both those conversations, right?
Yeah,
at the same time. And maybe that's what's confusing people. I'm not evil for having that position that we should be maintaining industrial property in Oakland.
No, not at all. Not
right.
at all. Not
but
at all.
Because I think people are conflating these things, because they're trying to have both those conversations at the same time. That's tough. And then, if people, God forbid, in the project sponsor world, call their opponents out and say they're fear mongering and they don't have issues and they're just doing this out of spite, then you don't have a productive conversation. How am I supposed to work with someone on solving my issue if the person on the other side of the table, when I sit down, says, you don't have any issues to solve? That's tough.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll say this too on that. I think you're 1,000,000,000% correct. The Athletics could take the stand, but it would require Major League Baseball doing so because Dave is taking his direction from Major League Baseball. That's why he's shifted so quickly. And he wants to maintain his job. There's a human element there. But the A's could say, hey, and we realize there's a sea level rise problem down there, and we believe that our investment could be the catalyst to gaining redevelopment money to straighten it out. They could say that.
Yeah.
And they would look like a major hero in doing so.
It's a good argument.
Yeah. They could do that. Because to use the but for that Dave consistently points to, which is just, is right. He could argue that because of their push, it would attract the need for a larger redevelopment area like the tool that I'm talking about, because community revitalization and investment authorities is just another redevelopment organization. It's different from the enhanced industrial finance district concept. Under that concept is basically another redevelopment agency that says, hey, we're going to have project areas in different places, East Oakland, Chinatown, West Oakland, and so on. He could say, hey, look, we can get here, and we'll help you get back NFL football. In other words, they could be the catalyst to make all that happen. Go to California legislation and straighten out the whole gaming issue because it's too much in the power of the Indian tribes, frankly. You can't do anything outside of it. And so what happened is that we're way past where we should be in terms of California's ability to take advantage of that. So the A's could be the organization that sets all this right. And I understand why they want Howard Terminal. This has been something that came up when Barry Bonds was slinging them out and hitting the Covey Cove and hitting balls in the Covey Cove. Everyone was saying, God, it'd be great for the A's to have one right over there. And the thing about it, Mike, is you get point right over the Howard Terminal from Giant Stadium. And that's really where all this started, right?
Yeah. Well, before that, there were also let's turn Howard Terminal into a convention center. There's been a bunch of stuff. I mean, it gets to this argument that we hear from the A's and their boosters too about, it's only, whatever it is, 3% or 5% of your total acreage or 2%, that percentage means nothing to me, but that argument is only there because of its proximity to Jack London, and that it's the first one. It's the oldest one. That's this one, this picture. I don't even remember what the name of the original street that's now MLK. This is whatever that street named Pier.
Oh, it was
Terminal.
7th, not 7th Street. It was.
I forget what it is. Yeah. That it's been there forever, right? That's the core of the original port. You wanted to be close to downtown. You wanted your piering there. You wanted to be close to the official end of the Transcontinental Railroad.
Adeline?
Is on some no, it's where MLK is now.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. It's like
I don't remember what the name of that street was.
Yeah.
But in any event, like, I mean, that's part of this push and pull of how the waterfront changes and the nature of what you do. And yes, and cities want to capitalize on that. And that's one of the other issues too. I think you're right. On the one hand, if the city is forced to deal with sea level rise on this site, then if you're not maximizing revenues out of something like this or anywhere else with tax increment, you're missing a real opportunity to build that infrastructure necessary to do sea level rise. Let's say you don't do that. What's the alternative? The alternative is it stays an industrial site within the purview of the port, and the port's already under requirement under state law to plan for sea level rise. So it's going to happen one way or the other. The question is, what does the site look like, and where are you generating the revenue? Are you generating the revenue out of property tax increment growth, or are you generating out of lease revenues? It's got to be one or the other. It's not going to be nothing. But I think that's the trade-off. And then I don't want to say it as a project opponent, but you sure as hell can say it. The city's missing one other big component here, which is SB 293 is so powerful across the board that it is not limited to a stadium at Howard Terminal.
No.
And that's one of the things about this whole onsite offsite thing, which I think is crazy that the A's are trying to push and the city on, and saying, "Oh, this is all about your deferred maintenance problem, and you're the ones who asked us to do offsite stuff."
Oh, I gotta ask.
Nonsense is that?
Tell the city staff to stop running away from SB 293 Skinner, because
City staff, don't listen to Zenny. Keep running away.
They keep running away from it. They're gonna have the community after them like they were after Frankenstein in the movie. Remember that? So serious. They're gonna be with pitchforks, and they're gonna be like with torches, and and deservedly so, because they wasted a year not implementing it. They should have talked to, as I said earlier, Alameda County and AC Transit. Okay.
Yeah. But here's a better question. Because that institutional knowledge doesn't rest with the city, give the staff the benefit of the doubt. But who does have the institutional knowledge to do this? All the attorneys that are hired by the A's to put together the original bill that got passed. They wrote the bill.
Holy
they just what's in it.
Wow, right.
That's crazy.
So are you suggesting they're driving this process?
No, because if they were, they would have told the staff. Here's
Wouldn't
Why wouldn't they? It's their project. They want to get past. Why would they want to maximize value out of it?
I have to investigate that. Interesting.
Well, I give you permission to investigate it as long as people continue to not listen to you to facilitate the construction of this project, which we don't like.
Cool.
I mean, that's the thing that's crazy. Our lawsuit, maybe take another tack to the same thing. Our lawsuit is about whether or not the A's get to take advantage of the CEQA streamlining because they missed the deadline. Whether you agree with our position or their position about the relevance of this deadline, they wrote the bill that put the deadline in there. So whether they were sloppy about hitting it, which is our contention because they missed it, or they were sloppy about setting up the deadline, which is their contention, they're sloppy. Why? I mean, it was their bill. Why not be explicit about what you want? This is it's just silly. The reason why it took so long to get the certification and was past the deadline because they couldn't meet the criteria that they set up for themselves to get the streamlining. It was nothing that we did as opponents. We're jumping on this because the certification came after the deadline. But the reason why it was late is because they couldn't prove to the state that they met the own criteria that they set out in the bill. They wrote the bill. So I guess I'm not surprised that they can't tell the city what's in 293. They wrote that one too. That's their bill.
That boggles the mind. I mean, that only happens when you're either not thinking or you're writing something when you're smoking weed and drinking. I don't know. I have no other explanation than those two to start. They can find out what really happened, or too many cooks in the kitchen. You know,
it's tough. I mean, and I guess that's the point. I want to maybe give the benefit of the doubt to the city. You know, if they don't have the expertise, their project sponsor sure as hell should.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're not helping. They're not helping themselves. They're not helping the city. And that's one of the ironies too. And I know you've seen it too in the Twitter sphere and all the blog posts and everything. Everyone blasting the mayor. That's totally unfair. The A's have never had a bigger booster than this mayor. The city staff right now, as much as they might not be doing the best job ever, they're trying to help. They're giving them a roadmap. They're saying, here's how we think you can do it. When's the last time the city told that to the Oakland A's? They have a draft EIR. It's on the street. I mean, you've done everything you could do with these folks to help them. That is not a failure of the mayor or the city staff to help these people. I mean, we can all have different opinions about what they're doing and how well they're doing it, but to see people blast, the mayor and the city staff for not wanting the A's or kicking them out of town, or they just don't care. I mean, that is not our experience at all. I mean, I just do not understand that.
I think
bigger booster.
Having contributed to some of that myself, and for the record, on the 9th of May, 2009, at 7:30 in the evening, I told Libby at her parents' house she should run for mayor, and my mom was there when I did it. And it walked, and she would sit around for counsel because she had all these friends like myself, and I felt she had the best infrastructure to make that happen. So
I personally supported her, and as an association, we've supported her, and obviously we have a really big disagreement about one development project, but other than that, I mean, the good mayor is because she's a cheerleader, right? I mean, she cares about Oakland, and that's this project to her.
But the issue that I have with Libby is Libby doesn't call on her friends. And the old Libby would have had us in a room and said, hey, look, I need help on this. You guys know it. What should I do? Okay. And that's not just me. There are a lot of friends of Libby who complain about that. Okay. I'm just being real. This is a human, not robots. Okay.
No. And, I guess I'm getting more to the, I don't disagree with that, because I would love to have us all in a room. But at the same time, I'm talking about the folks that are the haters online. I want to push this back to who they really need to be upset with is the A's, because again, go back to what you published a couple of months ago or weeks ago when you had that letter from the administration that laid out to the A's, here's what you have to do to get a project. And instead of saying thank you, putting their head down and doing it, they turned around and did all this crap in public saying, hey, if you don't vote on our term sheet before the council goes on break, then we're leaving. They gave them a roadmap. It said, here's how to do it. And then they said, on top of that, they said, this is going to be really hard, like for us to meet your timelines, but we're going to do our best to do it. And so to that end, what more can you ask? And so if you do over and above that, if you want additional expertise on that team. The A's got to pay for it, right? They got to put in the time and energy and effort to meet this timeline. They're not doing it. Have they met any of the basic roadmap points along this road so far? No, it's July. They put this out in March. They haven't done it. And so what are the odds? So in that roadmap, this was all towards trying to get the final EIR in front of the council by the end of the year, right, in December. But they can't do that unless they've met all these other criteria first to put together the development agreement and the community benefits agreement and all those other components that all need to be wrapped up together because they can't piecemeal the project. And that's if the EIR isn't recirculated, which we think it probably will have to be. But in any event, they haven't met their mark. So you know that they're going to have more time. You know they're not going to meet the city's timeline because they haven't already met their marks. So that's not the city's fault. And so, yeah, I mean, we have plenty of things to be critical about with the city and city staff on this project too. And I know you do. And I think those criticisms are valid, but neither you or I, and I think most of the people, put the blame for the project being deficient on the city. That is always, I would say unequivocally 100% always the project sponsor's fault. And even if you're in a jurisdiction that doesn't have dedicated planners on your project, like this project does, even if you're in a jurisdiction where you don't have friendly staff or a mayor supporting your project, like this project does, even if you don't have the ability to marshal resources through an IFD or special legislation, which this project does, even if you don't have a streamlined EIR process like this project does, you'd still have a lot of hurdles on a project this big. So yeah, I just don't understand why people are online throwing, slings and arrows at the mayor. And then the even better part is when they start, railing on the city council, and you watch the city council members respond, and they're like, "We haven't even seen the project yet." How powerful!
Right. Regarding the online stuff, I don't pay attention to any account that doesn't attach itself to a real name. The one that I do on Twitter is somebody that I know and I'm connected. I know who they are, but that's the rare occasion. Vital Vegas is Scott Robeson. That's in Las Vegas. He's a friend of mine. I mean, I know the people that I communicate with, but other than that, forget it.
My favorite is how, well, I've been called out for stuff, but my favorite is how our anti-stadium coalition is a fraud because we called ourselves the East Oakland Stadium Alliance. And like I've responded on Facebook feed several times, like literally we're an alliance of people that want a stadium in East Oakland. That is literally what we are.
Yeah, that's right.
And because there are only two choices there. It's either you're setting yourself up as anti this or pro that. And our practical point of view on that was that we will be able to grow a better alliance and coalition if we're recruiting people that want the A's to stay in East Oakland. And that's what we've done. And that's why we have folks who are activists in East Oakland in our alliance. They have absolutely no opinion about the waterfront. Like they don't have a stake in what we do at the waterfront. They don't care about port jobs. They care about East Oakland and they want the A's to stay there. But that doesn't mean we're AstroTurf. Like we put our logos on our website. You know exactly who we are.
Yep.
I think we're pretty clear about that. But, I think that's just more of the same. It's like, there's going to be a lot of noise and there's a lot of passion. These people are fans, and they're really ginned up, So I think it's imperative. This conversation is fantastic because we've been able to spend a lot of time just talking like people, and cutting through the crap.
Yeah. I gotta ask, do you foresee having to sue the Athletics?
Well, we're doing it now. I mean, I think it's fair to say, in all seriousness, that it is likely that if the EIR is not recirculated, that there will be a lot of people with a lot of problems with that document. So there are 400 comments, and the comments were substantive. I mean, some of the biggest sources of pushback were from filings from Communities for a Better Environment and Coalition of Chinatown Partners. Like they were really long filings, a lot of specifics. There was a suite of comments in addition to Communities for a Better Environment from Save the Bay, Baykeeper, Sierra Club, Audubon Society, primarily focused on the toxics issues on site. And that's obviously why Councilmember Cal made that a specific component of that conversation the other day, and why he pointed out directly to the city staff, if you don't actually do more than just respond to these comments, I'm going to be disappointed. That wasn't because of something that I said during public comment period or something else. That's because there are very specific environmental issues with the project. And then there were extensive comments that were submitted by the PUC, by the California State Lands Commission, by the California Highway Patrol, by BCDC. Again, I mean, you can't just write these things off. You need to actually respond to them in a way that's meaningful. And so much of them went to the core of the document, whether or not you're actually providing remediation, whether or not you have a plan to a plan versus an actual mitigation measure here. Whether one of the comments from BCDC and State Lands was, I don't know if this is a project EIR or a program EIR. Can you please clarify? That's a huge foundational issue. Mm-hmm. So, and as you know, those are treated very differently, right? On a program level EIR, every single further component of this project as it goes forward, like each tower that they decide to build, would need its own environmental document.
Right.
That is not what they. So in any event, when the CHP puts in a letter that says this project will cause significant and unmitigated congestion and public safety issues, you got to address it. You can't just say, no, it won't. you got to do it. So do I think, and that's why I guess the serious response is, like, do I think that the city and the A's can come up with responses to 400 of these letters that are multi-page and specific in the time frame that they've set? Are they set out? I don't. I think the only way you can actually address all those issues is through recirculation. If you have to do a recirculation, there is no way you're hitting this timeline. So they're basically choosing between timeline or an insufficient response in their environmental record. And they don't want that if they don't want litigation.
It sounds to me like they have set this up and determined that they're only going to go so far with it. But now I'll tell you what I think happened. I really believe that their world changed when Major League Baseball came forward and said, okay, this isn't working. I don't think Dave wants to take the route that he's taken. I don't even think John Fisher really wants to do it as much. But I do believe Major League Baseball came through, and I believe a lot of this is pandemic related. I don't know where Councilmember Fife got her numbers from, but the Athletics lost $40 million because of the pandemic. And that's driving a lot of their thinking, So maybe it's just not right. Maybe we need a cleansing and start all over again. That's what I'm seeing, because I just don't. There are too many people I'm going to say something that some people are not going to like. Have a project this big, you have to decide at one point where you stop all the criticism. You can do that two ways. You can either be dogmatic about it, or you can have a system that really checks the boxes. Okay?
Right.
And when the boxes are checked, the funding goes into place, the mitigation goes into place, you begin to see a project unfold. We don't have that model. And it's not that we can't build the model, and this is where I do blame the mayor and staff. They need to know. And it's not and I understand people think I'm being mean and all that, but I am being mean because we're paying them the big bucks to know. I go back to American Planning Association convention I went to in 1988 in New York. That guy from the commission, he knew his stuff. Now, look, how did I know he knew his stuff? Let me put it this way. He was the expert. He sounded like the expert. Let me put it this way. Everything he said had a systemic relationship, right? That's when you know, when you hear somebody, you know and they understand what they're talking about.
Right.
I don't hear that with staff. I hear a lot of piecemeal. And then with the A's, with Dave, I texted Dave months ago. I said, hey, look, if you're going to put out that the project is $12 billion at build out, you got to explain what the redevelopment is. I said, the fact that you didn't do it says to me you don't know your own project. And I said that to him in private. I put that in text. So there's a lot of not knowing about a big project and how to make it go. That's what I was when I was a little kid. I will tell you, if they put me in charge of this, I'm going to say something really crazy. But I did it with the Super Bowl. I single-handedly lifted it because I have a brain for that kind of thing. But I'm not the only one. You got it. Other people do it, okay? But Mike, the right set of people are not at the table. They're just not.
Yeah.
And someone arrogant or whatever, I don't care. This is what I went to school to do. This is me as a little kid. This is what I do in my sleep. And so I can call out other people because they don't think that way. And it's a matter of ego. Yeah, of course, you have to have a big ego. It's a big project. We all have big egos. So you better have a big ego to get this thing done. Anyway, my point is, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. You're right for your clients. Their concerns are just. The A's are right with their concerns. Their behavior is questionable at more than one juncture, and they don't have all the answers. They have the money to pay for staff. They're running off to Las Vegas, and so they're divided, which hurts everybody.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the situation.
Yeah. or maybe they don't. Maybe they don't have the money to pay for this stuff. And that's the end of the story, which is why they're acting like they're on a shoestring on all this stuff. And like we said before, if you're really at a place where you can't,
and you're right,
you can't make basic decisions about your baseline costs, you're already tapped out, or you put a best offer on the table as your first offer. Then you ain't got it. You ain't gonna push this thing across the finish line. And I think the other thing is that as much as we've kind of talked smack about people a little bit on this call, Dave, his team, they're smart people. We've met with them, very early on. Unfortunately, we haven't talked to them since summer of 2019, but early on, smart people, personable people. Right, they're driven to get something done. They have a lot of tools at their disposal. They have more tools at their disposal than most people do.
Like I told Dave, his only real problem is he went to Stanford.
Yeah, go Bears.
Go Bears.
And let's not hold that against him. Let's take that as an asset. And but you have to expect that doing a 180 on this position from where your organization was before, when Blue Wolf would say, rightfully so, like Howard Terminal is a nightmare, I'm going to stay away from it. is that there's some due diligence you got to do before you run this project out. And you would think that it would be more involved than just doing an ENA with the port on our issues, and really doing a careful assessment of what's out there. And if I might tell a bit of a story, and then I can let you go, obviously, because we've been on for a long time. But the person who put me in touch with the A's was Tom Guarino. And because obviously the A's were talking to Tom because they have that substation across the street from Howard Terminal, which raises a whole nother host of issues, by the way. There's a peaker power plant and a power substation there. Great place to put a baseball team. And Tom said, "Hey, have you talked to the A's?" I said, "No." He's like, "They haven't come talk to you?" "No." He's like, "Oh man, you got to talk to him. I'll have Taj give you a call." And if Tom hadn't put us together, I don't think they would have ever called. I think there would have been a rollout. One lunch with Taj and one meeting with Dave is not the extent of the due diligence you do for a project this big. Which, by the way, was an afterthought and not something they initiated on their own. It took a total third party. It took Tom, who, by the way, my wife and I know because he used to babysit our dogs when we go on vacation because he loved dogs. He was that kind of guy. He would, say, "Oh, let's problem solve," and that's what he did. He's like, "Oh, you guys got to talk." But they weren't in that frame of mind, right? Walking into it, they were in their due diligence phase, and they weren't talking to people, and that's just silly.
Yeah, but you got to admit, though, that if the city had a point person who understood this, the city would have done it. Because I'm used to people like George Williams or Austin Pinney or Jeff Chu, who are my bosses, or Pat Cashman, who hired me to work for the redevelopment. They knew how to get this sort of thing done in their sleep.
That's right.
That's
right. But then also, the secondary component of that is when we were talking to the A's, it was really before and leading up to the Port Commission vote on their term sheet, on their extension of the ENA. And that's where the Port Commissioners, who I think are very sincere about their belief that both of these things can live together, told us if there's a robust EIR, if we put the language in our ENA that says we don't have to subsidize their development, and we do see port compatibility measures, we think you guys are going to be okay. We don't think that's enough, but we are very happy that they did that because it is a sincere attempt to create this vision where both these things live together. So they finished that in May of 2019. And in July of 2019, I was at a BCDC meeting after I left several messages for Dave. And that's when he told me, "We're not going to keep talking with you. If your project, your $12 billion project, has known and quantifiable opposition that's trying to work with you in a context that your proposed landlord just set out, why would you walk away from that?" I mean, that does not make sense. And so that comes back to where we started a lot of this, which is there is a lot of frustration because there's not a getting to yes. There is frustration because Dave's response is, "I've made concessions and their issues aren't warranted."
Said that
problem, That's a problem. That's not fear mongering on our part. That's us trying to get his attention. For whatever reason, did they not do their due diligence? Did they underestimate the cost of all this stuff? Who knows what it is? Are they just being really good at holding their costs in one place so they don't have multiple bites of the apple as they go through the development process? Probably. I mean, I would try to do that as long as I could too, because you know how many discretionary steps they have to go through this process. I mean, I know Dave likes to say this is the bottom of the ninth and all that stuff. That's crazy. They have so many discretionary components to this that, the EIR is the first step. They still have to go through their building permits. They still have to go through a leasing process. They still have to go through a sales process. Those are just with the port, right?
Oh, if I may,
Yeah.
the city hasn't even laid out the schedule to establish and seek approval and build the financing authority for the project. And that's why I got so mad, because I said, hey, wait a minute, you put this thing out there, was approved by the governor October 11, 2019, called for such an agency, called for taxing agencies to be contacted, and yet it did nothing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I just agree with you? I meant no. Don't listen to Zenny. But then they have to go through the DTSC. They have to go through state lands, and they have to go through BCDC twice. They have to get an amendment to the Bay Plan, and then they have to do the permitting. So I mean, those are the base ones. But the EIR lays out like 30 different discretionary approval steps for them.
And then there's a state lands commission.
Yeah, it's huge. So I mean, look, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, are they playing close to the vest because they know that every step of the way there's a bite at the apple? Yeah, probably. But does that mean that they position themselves well to make sure that those bites don't hurt? I don't know. We don't know.
But how about this? Do you think that maybe the project is just too big for them here, and maybe they can get something that's more streamlined done in Las Vegas without so many complications?
Maybe. Can do town.
That's what it's looking like,
Yeah.
And
maybe. But the counter position, I think, on that is, look how quick the council has been to galvanize conversation around someone who actually has come out in public and said, I want to invest in East Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
The American Sports Entertainment Group and Dave Stewart have very quietly built some groundwork there.
here's one thing about that I have to say that bothers me, okay? Rick Tripp, I've written this, I've said it, I'll say it again.
I saw your point on that.
He's not a real developer. He's, brings on some guy that Larry Gallegos wrote in his staff report, was previously with the Ravens and with the Browns. That was back in 1999.
Yeah, I saw your post on that stuff.
Yeah, so my point is...
But I think the city's hungry for it, right? So if you walk into City Hall and you say, I really want to invest at the Coliseum location in East Oakland, let's do something. They're open to that. I mean, we haven't talked to anyone in our conversations that doesn't want to make something out of the Coliseum site, whether that involves baseball or not. And guess what? The A's are part of that. I mean, you can't escape it. That's what you get with their purchase with the county have. And then just to make sure we're wrapping up, I'm getting the sign. I'm getting the sign from up here, but
is that
yeah. But hey, it's Friday. I think back to Dave's, tossing out big numbers, because he likes to talk about big numbers, right? The $200 million we've spent over the last 5 years. And the incredulousness that people have when they hear that number, like, how could you spend that much money on planning? It's crazy. He didn't spend that much money on planning, and we all know it. He spent that much money on property acquisition, right? Those are sunk costs that aren't recoverable to this team. These are real estate holdings. This is the value of the property that they've purchased. It's probably appreciated a fair amount since they purchased it. They might actually come out ahead if they don't get a stadium.
That's a great point.
They turn around and sell these things.
Well, that's why they wanted the Coliseum property. They just wanted to flip it.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to get an asset as soon as you can for the best price you can?
Yeah, I remember Dan Calb told me that when we had our town hall for the Raiders in 2017, when they were going off for the NFL vote, he said, well, they better make up their mind, the NFL, because this is prime property. We have a lot of people who want it. So there you go. And one of those was the A's.
Yeah.
All right.
So, more power to them. I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, they're making investments, and that's good. But that doesn't mean they're out. This impression that somehow they lose $200 million if you don't give them what they want, and how unfair is that? That's not what happened. And if it is what happened, I mean, I don't know. I'm speculating. If they did spend $200 million on attorneys and consultants and architects and lobbyists, I'm really pissed that they didn't pick up anybody else. I mean, that's crazy.
To say the least. Hey, what are the next steps to close?
Well, first of all, make sure people stop listening to your advice. The next step is what happens at City Council, right? I mean, the hearing that they had earlier this week was really, really positive. They said, we care about issues. They said, we want to hear more. And city staff, you have to justify your recommendations to us. And then at the very end, they turned around and told the A's, hey, by the way, like, we think the staff recommendations are solid, which should be assigned to him to either tuck in behind the mayor and try to get this thing to the daylight of the finish line that way, or come up with some really good reasons why you could do something else. And we'll see what they can do in 2 weeks. I mean, the other thing the city council is really clear on, they're really solid on, is they know that this is a tough piece of a vote. It's direction to staff. And they are going to, from that speech that we heard from Councilmember Kaval, I think he was spot on. He basically said, if you want this to be non-binding, which it has to be because they don't have an EIR, then we're going to treat it like that. He basically said, if you want us to change our mind on this, we're happy to keep that in our back pocket.
Yep.
And he basically said, we're not going to play that trick where we get a little bit pregnant, because that can't happen.
Yeah.
So
which could happen to him in Las Vegas. It's happened to many a developer. Las Vegas has a way of doing that. That's what Dave has to watch out for.
Yeah, well, maybe he got bit by the Twitter bug again. Like, but worse things have happened in Las Vegas.
Hey, let's close that. Yeah, that's true, including to me, but that's another story.
Next live stream.
They got it. Hey, stick around in the backstage. Everybody, keep in touch with this man through the East Oakland Stadium Alliance, and tell them your website.
PMSAship.com.
There you go. And folks, I think this is one of the longest live streams I've had of an interview, and not me talking. Not bad. Not bad.
It was great.
All right, everybody. We'll see you later. Stick around in the background, Mike. Thanks, everybody. And remember, subscribe to Zinni62 and bookmark OaklandNewsNow.com. That ends this broadcast.